We also learned today that Zelensky will meet with the French president and the German chancellor in Paris. First, though, he is visiting training Ukrainian troops in the UK. With me now, retired Air Force Colonel Cedric Leighton. Good to have you on as always. So these meetings are important in terms of the relationships, but I want to focus on what's happening on the ground in trading, because you have 10,000 Ukrainian troops trained inside the UK in the last 6 months, another 20,000 to be trained in the UK this year. This is quite direct involvement of a NATO ally in terms of training the Ukrainians. What is it training them to do?
So there are a lot of things, Jim, that they're doing, and this coupled with the training that's going on in Germany at Grafenwoehr, at the training center there, plus at Fort Sill in Oklahoma. So we're all involved in the training of the Ukrainians right now. So one of the big things that they're looking at is the Challenger tank. And you know, when you see exactly what they're doing, this one, of course, doesn't have the armament on it, no cannon, but they're practicing driving it, they're practicing moving it through the mud, which is really important for the terrain in Ukraine.
As the ground thaws, that's going to become an issue in those eastern battlefields.
Absolutely, and this particular tank is quite maneuverable in those conditions, and they hope that they can, take as many of these as possible so that they can then use them in offensive operations throughout the eastern sector, especially.
And we saw that announcement just a couple weeks ago, because the Germans sending the Leopard tanks, the U.S. going to be sending Abrams tanks, and you can't just send the things. They got to learn how to use them, because they're different from the Soviet standard tanks that they've been using so far.
That's exactly right. And as much as you get that with the tanks, you also have that issue with aircraft. And one of the key things I think, Jim, to note about the visit to the UK, for the first time ever, a country that is training the Ukrainians is saying very specifically that they're training Ukrainian pilots on NATO standard aircraft.
Like the F-16.
Exactly. So like the F-16, and you can see here there are a lot of key features of the F-16. Its speed, of course, is quite clear. It uses radiation detection abilities to detect air defense systems. It's got a 20-millimeter gun. It also has bombs like the JDAM. It also has missiles like the Sidewinder that took down the Chinese balloon, the surveillance balloon. And of course, it's got air-to-air capabilities plus air-to-ground capabilities, and that's critical.
So folks have been talking about sending Western aircraft to Ukraine since the start of the war, which it's going to be a year in just a couple of weeks' time. But the view of NATO, including the U.S., has been that's too much of an escalation. One, they don't really need these now. That's not the weapon we should be focusing on. But two, the concern being you send these aircraft, you're more and more in direct conflict with Russia, or Russia would view it that way. But are we moving toward this becoming a reality?
I think so. I mean, the impetus is certainly there. There are a lot of people, military analysts like myself, people who are watching what the Ukrainians are doing. They're saying very specifically the Ukrainians need this in order to really prosecute the war effort. And if they don't do that, they can't win, is in essence what we're looking at.
Okay, so let's talk about what folks are concerned about right now, and that is that Russia is mounting forces, and there's evidence of this, along the border here for a new offensive. When I speak to U.S. military officials, they say, sure, but those aren't particularly capable forces. They're not particularly well equipped or armed. Should Ukrainians be concerned about a major and effective Russian offensive?
Yes, they should, because one of the key things to think about, Jim, is that quantity has a quality all its own, as the saying goes. And so when you look at, for example, let's take a look at
Kharkiv, let's go to the south, you have, there's a lot of, the reason we had the pictures of them bombing Kharkiv is they seem to be softening the battlefield.
Exactly, and that's precisely what they're doing. So you're seeing what we call preparation of the battle space, and when you look at some of the things that can happen here, for example, you see the area around Crimea, in this area. The Russians could potentially move in this way. They could potentially go after Izium right here. There is a possibility that they could roll back the Ukrainian gains that the Ukrainians made.
Which only happened a few months ago when they very quickly, the Ukrainians pushed back Russians from here.
Exactly. And so when you see that, and then you look at what could happen in the south, so you could see what's happening in the north, and you could see what's happening in the south, because when you see what you're doing with Kherson, the Ukrainians took Kherson, but it's still under Russian artillery range. It is not a safe place to be, as we've reported many times. And these natural boundaries right now, they're helping the Ukrainians, but they're also helping the Russians, because they're keeping the Ukrainians out of here for the moment. But if the Ukrainians get more maneuverable forces, they could potentially ford the river and go down this way.
Take some more back, and that's why those tanks could be essential there. Cedric Leighton, thanks so much as always.
You bet, Jim.